We have more breaking news tonight, plenty of it. We just learned that the House Intelligence Committee has, in effect, told the administration to put up or shut up on President Trump's claim that President Obama had him wiretapped during the campaign. That is what the president tweeted last weekend. Since then, lawmakers with access to classified material have said, one after the other, they have seen no evidence of what, if true, would be one of the dirtiest political tricks of all time. That pattern continued today. And tonight, a White House source tells us that the president has not spoken to FBI Director James Comey about this or anything all week. Also today, another Michael Flynn eruption. We learned that he was working as a foreign agent for another country during the campaign and getting paid for it, big league and bigly. There are questions tonight about what the White House knew back then and later when he was vetted, if you could call it that at this point, for the national security job. More now from CNN's Jeff Zeleny.
Was President Trump aware his first national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, was registered as a foreign agent to represent the government of Turkey?
No, just so we're clear, you wouldn't. The General Flynn filed with the Department of Justice 2 days ago.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Flynn's lobbying business was private and took place before he joined the administration, although at the same time he was advising the Trump campaign last year.
That is not up for the government to determine. There are certain private citizens' activities that you conduct and you seek counsel on or professional advice.
Flynn's contract with the government of Turkey ended after the election. Spicer dismissed a series of questions about the lobbying disclosure.
No. The person who is in line to be the national security advisor may need to register as a foreign agent, and that doesn't raise a red flag.
It's not a question of raising a red flag, John. It's a question of whether or not they gave them the advice that they're supposed to.
On day 50 of the Trump presidency, this was the latest distraction at the White House. It's been a full week now since President Trump leveled the explosive accusation that President Obama was spying on him at Trump Tower. But again today, still no evidence.
Thank you all very much, and we're going to get to work. Thank you.
Asked 3 times, the president wouldn't say whether he had any proof to back up his unsubstantiated charges. The White House is now trying to keep its focus on health care.
And that's what people want. They want repeal and replace.
Yet Washington is consumed by Russia and the widening investigation into any connections between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. The congressional probe includes allegations of presidential wiretapping, which no one seems to know about but Mr. Trump. Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, told CNN's Manu Raju today he has seen no evidence, but suggests the question will come up when FBI Director James Comey testifies on Capitol Hill later this month.
He's certainly prepared for the question, and I don't see any reason why he can't answer it. He may even welcome the opportunity.
The top Republican on the committee, Chairman Devin Nunes, echoed his comment from earlier this week that he had not seen any proof to back up the president's claims.
We want to find that out, but at this point I just don't have anything to tell you.
All right, Jeff Zeleny joins us tonight. And Jeff, we're learning about a deadline to produce evidence, aren't we?
We are indeed, John. The House Intelligence Committee has given the Department of Justice a deadline. They say by next week, on Monday, in fact, they want any relevant information on this wiretapping allegations. Now, so far, as you said, no one has said that they have seen anything. Not a Democrat, not a Republican, no one here at the White House except the president, but he hasn't talked about it. But they are giving them a deadline on Monday. And now, John, this is all building toward that first hearing on March 20th, a week from Monday. FBI Director James Comey, one of the first witnesses to be called.
And the question is, how much will he say? Jeff Zeleny, thanks so much for being with us. Back now with the panel, Jason Miller, FBI Director James Comey. The president hasn't spoken to him this week about this or anything. Does that seem odd to you?
No, I don't think so. I think, when we're talking all this, the Russia stuff or whether, the taps, this is going to go to the House Intel Committee. They're going to investigate it. They'll put forth their report, and then we'll take it from there. I'm certainly not going to get ahead of the White House here on this, but I think one of the things I'd point out is there hasn't been any evidence that's been put forward saying that the Trump campaign or anyone in Trump world was colluding with the Russians, but it still seems okay to go and chase down that rabbit hole. Then what we do know, as a matter of fact, is that there were people who were being tapped. We know there were 2 FISA court applications. One was rejected, one was accepted.
There are reports that there were those FISA applications.
But John, they were talking about the fact that there were these specific conversations where they had transcripts of people's phone conversations. So we know with mathematical certainty that there was tapping that was going on. Now, we'll leave it to the House Intel Committee to get to the bottom of the rest of it.
There were reports that there was tapping going on. There's no evidence at all, according to anyone who's spoken, that President Obama ordered wiretapping of President Trump, which is a world away, a universe away from there being investigations on somebody maybe connected to Trump world and having there be wiretaps on them.
But I'd push back a bit on that and say we do know absolutely that the administration ordered it, because otherwise how would the phones be getting tapped and how would they be doing this?
Administration is a very broad term here when you're talking about the entire Justice Department or intelligence services, because technically they're all part of the administration. But I do understand your point there.
But phones were being tapped. I mean, to be clear on that, and we know that. We read it in the New York Times, so we know.
We know the Russian ambassador's phone was
right. What we read in the New York Times is that there was what was, I think, routine surveillance on the Russian ambassador. I realize that people don't like the word routine surveillance. Those two words together.
The Russian ambassador.
Correct, and that's understandable. But that is, as we know it, where those transcripts came from. Any broader suggestion, there is no confirmation of the FISA court order report. And certainly there is nothing so far that we have heard of that substantiates what President Trump said about his predecessor.
Kayleigh, Michael Flynn, the very briefly serving national security advisor. The type of thing that maybe should have come up during the vetting process, that he was working as a foreign agent for Turkey and getting paid a lot for it during the campaign?
Look, I do think you're right. It should have come up in the vetting process, and particularly today during the press briefing when, Spicer was asked the question about, you had the transition attorney who was informed about this, and instead of addressing that, why didn't that information get disseminated to Trump himself or someone in the hiring process? He kind of didn't have an answer to that. My inclination, I believe the White House didn't know about this. I believe that they didn't know he was considering registering as a foreign agent, but I think it was overlooked in the transition process. And my father always said, if you've got to eat crow now. And that's the Southern way of saying sometimes you've just got to own up to the fact we missed this one. It was overlooked in the process, and I think that's what Sean should have done today.
Bakari?
Well, that's not true, because the White House did know about it, and specifically the vice president knew about it, because if I'm not mistaken, Elijah Cummings actually sent a letter directly to the vice president of the United States during the transition process, letting him know that there were relationships between Michael Flynn and Turkey. And so when we're talking about what the White House knew and when they knew it, which is a famous phrase from before I was born, if I may say, I do think that the ineptitude of the transition is something we keep coming back to. It's something that we talked about in the first segment. It's something we'll talk about now, and it's something we'll talk about in the future.
But the vice president never got that specifically, and that letter, by the way, was sent the day he was hired, so it never made it into the vice president.
Well, I mean, the fact that the vice president, during a transition period, never got a letter that informed him from a ranking member of a House committee that there were nefarious relationships, or at least relationships he should be aware of, just shows the flaws in the transition process. And I think that's all I'm saying. I'm saying that this transition process did not live up to the standards. And for anyone to say that the White House didn't know about it, it is willful ignorance at best.
So, Kirsten, I want to talk about another series of data points that we got over the last 48 hours as people are looking at and going, that's odd. So Nigel Farage, from Great Britain, who is friends with Donald Trump and was pushing the Brexit, met with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, walked into the Ecuadorian embassy in London, had a meeting with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, as we know, released all that stuff hacked during the election. It's one of these things where I don't know if you can connect the dots, but there are a lot of dots here.
There are a lot of dots, but I do think we have to be careful about speculating about things that we don't know. So there are things that look bad. It doesn't mean that we necessarily know that somehow that was connected to things that were happening with Donald Trump. So I'm a little, I like to wait and see and get more facts before I start making accusations. But can we go back to this FISA stuff about what Jason was saying? I mean, if you're saying, that we know people were being tapped, if you want to accept that, then that actually is more of an indictment of the Trump people than anybody else. Because if that happened, that means a FISA court had reason to believe that they were doing something nefarious. So that's what's sort of ironic about this accusation, is that indirectly Donald Trump is sort of saying that they were doing something wrong. Unless you believe the FISA court just lets them go and tap whoever they want. The other thing I was going to say is, why doesn't he just declassify this? I mean, if this is true, why doesn't he just declassify all the information around it and release it and let everybody see it?
Yes, push back on that and say that we saw with this previous administration so many aspects of the federal government becoming politicized, whether it's the IRS targeting people. Certainly, the folks in the Clinton campaign would take issue with the way that the certain aspects of law enforcement was run, particularly during this past year. I think Bakari would probably agree with me on that one.
That's the height of irony for you to invoke Director Comey in your defense.
But look, I think the fact that we've seen so much of this happen before, I mean, we don't know the details on it. Clearly, it was rejected one time, it was gone with another time. But all this really is a big chase down the rabbit hole to try to essentially smear the president and say that there's some sort of foreign involvement that made him win, when the fact of the matter was he ran a better campaign.
Again, the president may have dug this rabbit hole himself with that tweet last week. We will find out a lot more over the next 8 days.
They were tapping we know it from the New York Times. I mean, they were recording conversations.
They were recording someone else's conversations. We don't know who is in. We don't know why yet.
The United States did not tap Donald Trump. And if you can't say that, then that's the ultimate rabbit hole that's being chased.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. Up next, President Trump and the White House press secretary there praising the new jobs report, the same kind of report that candidate Trump used to call phony. We're keeping him honest on that. Coming up.
Knowing where you stand has never been easier, except when it comes to retirement. At Fidelity, you get a retirement score in just 60 seconds, and we'll help you make decisions for your